What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. 3000 GT is gonna get its engine once again. So I've been working on this thing like every night that I've had available to me. And I think we finally got it to a point where the drivetrain can go back into the car and start reassembling everything. I have like two things that I needed to tighten up on the engine bay itself, but otherwise we're ready to drop this thing in. So quick recap of what we've done to the 3000 GT drift car's drivetrain. I started off by pulling everything out. Easy as that. And once I broke it all down, the whole reason I did this because the car was starting to burn more oil out of the exhaust, and I was starting to develop leaks. The 31-year-old gaskets and seals on this engine were finally starting to let go. Now, I've done valve cover gaskets and things like that over the years, but I'm talking oil pan gasket, exhaust gaskets starting to leak exhaust. Rear main seal was leaking. The transmission was leaking. So things like that just needed to be resealed. Not to mention, once I disassembled it, I figured out where my coolant has been slowly disappearing to. Turns out the rear head gasket was also breached into one of the cylinders, and coolant was basically burning off with the car. So I took it, stripped it all down to a block, left all the internals in, but I had the heads decked. I replaced all the valve stem seals. I replaced the head gaskets, new hardware, new head bolts, all that jazz, put back on. I replaced all the seals. So rear main seal, valve covers, these I still have to refinish, but they're getting new seals, cam seals, oil pan gaskets. I got new exhaust gaskets for the manifolds to the heads, and then from the turbos to the manifolds, and then from the turbos to the downpipes. So we got all new gaskets everywhere. We got new rubber hoses. So the feed lines for everything have been replaced. I also did a lot of new hardware. So I got this zinc coated hardware from Bellmetric and replaced a lot of the factory hardware, both on the engine and in the engine bay, with some zinc coated Bellmetric hardware. And I just repainted everything. Transmission got just a simple spray, nothing crazy, but then, all these pieces, brackets, they all got sprayed with stainless steel paint, steel it if you want to call it that, even though it's Seymour. But the valve covers will be getting done in a color. Spark plug covers are getting to steel it. Intake plenum, throttle body, that's all getting the steel it treatment. So it's going to be very subdued. It's going to be like that silver steel it color that I also did my engine bay in, as you can see right there, and black. And then we're going to have our one color on the valve covers here. So painted like engine mount bracket, alternator bracket, all that stuff. We just cleaned it all up, got rid of all the years of residue and junk that has accumulated on here. And then power steering pump was also leaking. This was a used unit that I threw in here like 2 years ago, I guess 3 years ago almost at this point. But I was suffering from a squeak from it, a belt squeak. Turns out the tensioner was loose, so we got it nice and tight on the tensioner. I put new O-rings on the pressure line. I actually opened up the backside of the pump. I replaced the O-rings on our drain line and on the backside of the pump. So we have all new O-rings and stuff in there. So I basically just tried to reseal as much as I could. If you look down here, you can see our lower plenum got the steel it treatment. Even our water crossover tube got the steel it treatment. I resealed the fuel injectors, got new O-rings and all that on them. So we're good to go here. I need to put the intermediate shaft that goes to the driver's side front axle, even though I don't have it. That is basically my plug for the transmission. And then this thing is going to be ready to go into this thing. Engine bay wise, I took my time. I prepped as well as I could this engine bay, and it came out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. And then, like I mentioned, zinc coated hardware for everything across the engine bay that you could see. I still have a couple wiring things to do over here, but I'll address that. But otherwise, we are in pretty good shape. I did new fuel filter, the secondary filter. That is a factory filter right there. But I also have a pre-filter coming out of the fuel cell in the back before the surge tank. This guy is the post-surge tank filter. And then on the harness, I just cleaned up using some Tessa tape, some areas that got a little worn out over the years. So we used some Tessa tape just to recover some areas and some joints and whatnot. This is the tucked harness that I did years back. So we're ready to go here. I got to throw that brake master cylinder back onto the booster. I will repaint the booster, but otherwise, once that's hung, I just got to move some things out of the way. And then I'm going to try and get this thing lined up in here and get our front and back motor mounts hooked up and get an engine dropped in here. So I'm going to do those things right now, and then we should be good to go. I also replaced like all the rubber grommets and things like that for the brake lines that shoot out into the wheel wells. But yeah, so the goal here is to get an engine lined up and laid back down to this engine bay. So let's see if we can make it happen. All right, and just like that, we have the 6G72 installed in the 3000. It took a little bit. I needed a second set of hands, so Morgan came out and provided some assistance, just getting the bolts through the engine mounts and whatnot. Just a lot of like pushing and maneuvering while she was applying pressure onto the bolts to get them through the mounts. But we're in. We're good. I got the alternator back in. You can't pull the engines or put the engines in with the alternators because those pulleys just, unless someone has before, but I've never been able to get the pulley to clear the headlight bucket while pulling an engine out of the top of these. But we got the alternator in, got the wiring hooked up. Again, I still have to finish this wiring over here. But from here, I can drape my wiring harness back into the engine bay, and I got some things I can start hooking up. So basically, when I did this tucked harness, usually the harness comes out back there, runs up the frame rail, but I did this tucked harness many moons ago. I basically separated it into two sections. One section that covers the back of the engine, and then one section that covers the front of the engine. So the front of the engine covers the PTU, the coil packs, all the coolant sensors here, and then the front bank of fuel injectors. And I think I also have the temp sensor that is in the upper rad hose. Then the rear section covers the speed sensor, which I don't actually use, but I plug it into the sensor just so that it has a home. And then we have the 3 plugs here, which is the oil pressure sensors, the power steering, something on the power steering pump. We have our rear bank of fuel injectors, and we have our knock sensor, and then we have our cam angle sensor right here. And then we also have our throttle body connections as well. So we got throttle position sensor and I'm drawing a blank, the 2 on the throttle body. So they're pretty easy. This one drapes over the top of the trans, right around here. And then this guy goes down low along the frame rail, the cross member there, and then comes up to where it needs to be. So I'll do that. We have power wires that I'm just gonna lay where they belong, shifter cables to hook up, fuel lines, our feed and our return to hook up, and then we'll be one step closer. I gotta get the master cylinder reattached to the booster. We'll be one step closer. Unfortunately tonight, I can't go too much further other than hooking everything up because again, my valve covers are not done and my intake plenum and throttle body is not done either. So I've just kept them on here to keep everything out of our freshly, I guess you could say freshly rebuilt heads. So that's why I've just had them laying on here to keep all the dirt and dust out while we're doing all this maneuvering and putting this thing back in. But that is gonna be a project for probably tomorrow. Maybe I'll start it, we'll see, or the weekend. But we've gotten to a good point here so far in getting this thing back together. I know it's been a long time coming, and I'm excited to see it keep coming together. So I'm gonna jump in, start hooking up this wire. So we have our fuel hooked up. We have our feed line, which is an AN line, and our return line with the proper hose clamps. We have our shifter cables hooked up. We have these guys plugged in, PTU coil packs, coolant sensors. I unplugged this one in because I need to get a new little sensor there. We have our starter trigger wire plugged in. I'll tidy up all this stuff. We have our main fuse box hooked up to the starter. We have our front harness pretty much ran. I'll tuck this up under here a little more once it's finalized. I need to get a little bolt for this guy right here to ground out. We have our MAF sensor that's going to land right here. We have our electronic boost controller that's wired in. That wire will sit underneath the intake, and that guy, I'll get a nut. We'll bolt up right there. Like I said, shifter cables. Power wire is run back out there. That is just the main feed that hits the starter, and then I ran the white wire that usually goes to the battery on these, and I ran that to the starter. So just for like the cleanliness, the tuck aspect of it. And that is pretty much it. Heater core lines are hooked up. Heads up, guys, if you're ever doing this. Oh, and I'm getting rid of this. That is not pretty. It's going. But heads up, if you ever have to replace your heater hoses, you have to get the OEM Mitsubishi ones. They feature these bends that clearance things like the turbo inlet and whatnot. And if you try and use non-molded hoses, it just doesn't work. You can't get the right angles without getting it to kink. So just a heads up, they're cheap. Last time I bought them, so they're probably more expensive, but last time I bought them, I think they were like 30 bucks, 40 bucks for the pair. But we're in a pretty good spot here. I think that's where I'm going to wrap this up. So the engine is finally in, and we have made significant progress on this car. I can't wait to hear it fire. I'm gonna, in the meantime, I'm gonna work on the little things, the little odds and ends of just, reassembly. But in the next video, we'll try and start this thing. So I have a couple little things to do between now and then, but promise you the next 3000 GT video, you will hear a running 3000 GT drift car once again. With that, I just want to say thank you guys for watching. I'm going to wrap it up here. It's been a long week. My back hurts. And, we're one step closer to getting this thing back into much better running shape, but then also ready to move to the new garage, which you guys have seen in other videos. So thank you again for watching. 3000 GT guys, shout out to you guys for hanging around amidst all the cts-v content that we've been doing. I will touch on one thing before I let you go. So if you're still watching, I have the new Stansco remote bleeder for the clutch. So all the way down in there, where is it? You can see the slave. That's where your bleeder valve is. So you got to reach down there with like a little 10 mil. It always makes a mess trying to bleed it. Not to mention, you got to take apart. It's easy if you take the battery out, take the Y pipe out. Well, came up with a remote bleed solution similar to on my LS cars. And this guy can route up next to your battery. You can, depending on how you route it, there's plenty of options. You got plenty of length here. You can route it across the top of the transmission, like so, and then have it down here by the fuse box. But basically it'll make bleeding this clutch a lot easier and a lot cleaner. So keep an eye out for that. I have a video coming just showing it installed on the back of the transmission when it was out. So just keep an eye out for that one. And like I was saying, thank you guys for watching. Thanks for subscribing if you haven't. If you don't, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell, leave a comment. Let me know. There will be more 3000 GT comments. So 3000 GT guys, let me know you're here. Drop a comment below. And with that being said, thanks for watching. Have a good night. I'll see you in the next one.